My name is Callum McCann. I'm a developer experience advocate here at DBT Labs, and I will be the MC of this talk, where we will be watching But My Numbers Say This and Other Horror Stories by Emily Ritter, who is the Vice President of Marketing at Mode. If you are interested in asking any questions or engaging with the community, both online and in-person people, please go to the Coalesce But My Number channel on DBT Slack, where we will have Slack admins pinning questions and ensuring that every conversation is going on well there. And then additionally, the speaker will be around for about an hour or two afterwards, answering all of those questions that have been asked by members of the community. With that being said, let's give a hand to Emily and welcome her up.
Hi everyone, here and online. I'm Emily. I lead the marketing team at Mode. Since I joined back in February, I often refer to this as Mode Round 2. Fun fact, I worked at Mode for about 4 years. You watching 2 talks? Worked in 4 years in the early days of the company. And when I left, DBT was just a little side project of Tristan and Drew when they were starting up Fishtown. And so while living in a completely different world of payroll, benefits, and HR as I was leading product marketing over at Gusto, the world of data kept trying to pull me back. Y'all coined some really fun terms like the modern data stack, data mesh going on in some other room right now. But ultimately, the thing that pulled me back into the industry was the thing with the broadest potential for impact, business intelligence. Now, I know some of you shudder when you hear the phrase BI. It's not for folks like you. But at the end of the day, data is a tool to drive business growth. And rather than thinking about BI through the lens of legacy software, at Mode, we really see it as a central hub to bring experts like you, data experts, and domain experts like me together to unlock growth, drive efficiency, and really optimize your business. And so in this new era of modern BI, context is queen. And that means clearing the path out of all the muck that gets in your way of clarity around numbers and working together across teams. So when you hear things like, your numbers don't match mine, and some other horror stories that we're gonna get into later, it's time to pause and have those spidey senses go off and say, hey, I think it's time to get curious. So show of hands in this room for those tuning in online. How many of you had an experience where it maybe felt like you were being stung in the face by a colleague when you were trying to work with data? It's so simple in your head, the question you're trying to ask. It's obvious to you, but they just don't get what you're trying to say. And every time they say, why do you want to know, feels like a little bit of a bee sting. This used to happen to me a lot by someone you might follow on Twitter. This guy. In the early days of Mode, I was the first marketer. In addition to being one of the co-founders, Benn was our first analyst. Our data practices were just warming up, and everything was uncharted territory. I'd ask for data, he'd ask me why, and we'd go back and forth. And at one point, in a moment of sheer frustration, I said, Ben, these antagonistic sort of feeling whys feel like you're stinging me in the face. It was a moment of frustration, but it was also a moment of clarity. Because we all know that why is actually the best place that you can start when you're trying to solve problems with data on both sides. At the time, we both failed to see maybe that we were bringing unique perspectives to the table. But I needed to know clearly what I was asking for as a business stakeholder and also anticipating some of the questions I might ask next. So that why might feel like one of those horror story moments, but it's actually a signal to teams that you need to get curious. And if it's not being asked, that might actually be a problem too. So as data teams and business teams working together, we need to make sure we're providing that context back and forth, ultimately bringing those skill sets together in a more positive version of a bee, something that biologists refer to as a superorganism. So for those of you who are into biology, you might already know what this is. And you're like, what does this have to do with business intelligence? We'll get there. So a superorganism is a collective unit of individuals. Ants act this way, coral acts this way. It's people working as a social unit where the division of labor is highly specialized. So the kicker, individuals are not able to survive very long by themselves in isolation. So imagine if we could approach data and business intelligence like a superorganism. So you might be wondering, what are some characteristics of superorganisms? There's actually something called collective intelligence, and it turns out it's extremely relevant to building high-functioning organizations, especially as software gets more and more powerful. So collective intelligence is shared or group intelligence. It emerges from the collaboration, the collective efforts of specialists. And so while it's a concept that's been around for centuries, today it's becoming even more and more about how computers and humans can work together. It's strengthened when these groups of things come together. But before we get into more about how we can use this in the context of the semantic layer, let's look at some more horror stories to know when we're not yet acting like a superorganism. Sounds a lot like this. I bet these are all things that you all have experienced before. Can you pull ARR by month instead of day or week? I just like to look at the data. Yes, I would love to challenge y'all that is the equivalent of a select star. How do we set people up to get a lay of the land? Another upcoming feature from Mode that you should keep an eye on is going to really help with this. Something just doesn't seem right. Again, maybe not enough context is being shared up front, something's missing. It doesn't reflect your business stakeholders' understanding of the business that they are a domain expert in. All right, here's another one I bet y'all have heard before. GA says something different. Yeah? Okay, so you gotta start with your team's priors, where their data lives today. If you can get a revenue leader out of Salesforce, you've probably won the gold medal of analytics engineering. So where are they getting the data before, and what software does that software bring extra logic into the system? Aggregating an aggregate. I know this is a thing that we should all be concerned about, but sometimes it comes across as treating people with kid gloves rather than empowering them. So as data teams, you can come with data and training to make sure that people use tools effectively. And this is part of why we built some of the features around our integration that we did. So an interesting thing about collective intelligence, it's not always about the smartest person in the room. It's about tapping into that creativity when groups of experts come together with alternate viewpoints. So how do we achieve this instead of a bee sting, this stock photography pinnacle of teamwork? We can get to a point where people are sharing their collective intelligence, feeling really bought in to sharing those ideas and knowledge. So the moment is now to start doing this. dbt is bringing the semantic layer to life. It's a really exciting moment. To be the standard for metrics defined outside of all of the tools that end users are using, the metrics have to be right. And right means that they reflect the business and everybody's understanding of what those metrics mean. So you, like us at Mode, are probably really excited to jump into dbt and continue codifying your metrics. But before you do, get really curious. Slow down to go fast. Bring your business teams into the fold. They may not need to know the ins and outs of the dbt IDE, but they do need to be your partners in building those metrics and sharing their domain expertise to bring those metrics to life. Okay, so we start by tapping into everyone's knowledge. This means getting on the same page and getting all of the information out from the various corners of the organization. So let's start with an example that is near and dear to my heart. Who's ever tried to work with a marketing team to count leads? Super easy, right? Cool. So maybe a lead is a human, maybe it's an organization. That's a good place to start. But what about, is a lead email address in the system? What if you hire a BDR team and they start outbound prospecting and those email addresses have suddenly never interacted with you? I wouldn't count that as a lead. Is a lead net new? Sometimes your marketing team, a lead will come in, talk to your sales team, they'll go dark, they'll come back a year later. Some marketing teams have a concept of recycled. Should you count those as leads? Is every product sign up a leads? Students, tons of them sign up for Mode to learn SQL and Python. They may buy 10 years from now, 5 years from now, not a lead in my book, as much as I love the awareness. Do your lead sources change? Let's say you've been at home for 2.5 years and you have your very first happy hour, like we're having at Acme tomorrow night. Y'all should come. does that data source hit your data warehouse in a way that can be counted, right? So what is a lead? It's going to be unique at every single business, and it's going to change how your business evolves. So everyone needs to agree on that definition and drive that impact. That's what you codify in DBT, the collective understanding of these metrics. And this means getting a lot more people involved in the work. So I have some bad news. You have to do this for every metric, right? You got to get out of the IDE and into some Zoom sessions with real humans that have this knowledge built up in their head. There are some shortcuts, though. And that means giving your business teams tools to help you do this faster. So we need to, as business people, start by documenting. And data teams, your job is to help us think through the questions to bring that knowledge to life, right? In a way that's structured that you can build upon. So anybody who's worked with me knows I love a good template. You can take this one and use it. It might not be exactly right, but it'll help you go through some of the questions, some of the roadblocks you might encounter along the way. So why this metric? Why now? What are the follow-on questions we'll want to answer once we have this metric defined? So once you're serving up those metrics in a BI tool-like mode, you want to make sure you have all of your dimensions set up and have your business teams thinking ahead so they don't have that horror story moment of, hey, can you pull it by this other thing instead, right? Another really great way to get at this question is to say, hey, if you're going to share this report with your CMO or with your head of finance, and the number changes wildly, what are going to be some of the things they're going to ask if you looked into? That's another way to get at the dimensions that you might want to code into your metric. Where does this data live today? Where do you rely on this information, right? This is going to help you uncover but GA says something different. And then that'll also help you figure out if you have all the right data you need in the warehouse to start with. So these are all the things that you're slowing down to go fast on. What's your current definition? Plain English, write it out, explain it to me like I'm 5, right? And then what's one thing about this metric that might not be obvious on the surface? And who else does this metric matter to? The thing about some of these key metrics is that other people in the organization might have very different collective intelligence about what it means, and you need to bring all that together and make sure everybody's aligned. And then one of them that's cut off right at the bottom, which I think is actually a really important one, is how often should we plan to review this metric, right? So the metric that you write at first might be right in that moment, but it's going to evolve as your business changes. So having an agreement with the team you're working with on how often you should come back or what's the trigger to come back will be really helpful for ensuring that those metrics that you're serving up in the end tools are things that people are going to continue to use, and they're going to be dashboards or reporting or self-serve reports that they're going to really rely on. Okay, so next you have to strengthen the team, right? And you have to strengthen the conditions needed to share openly. I think this is something that maybe teams often skip over, which is just what makes up a healthy team, right? When I was having the moment of feeling like I was getting stung in the face, we didn't have like a really strong team yet. And so, we really need to think about creating psychologically safe environments, and that's how we can move faster, increase transparent communication, surface challenges more readily, and also make it cool for people to be like, hey, I actually don't know, and that's totally okay. Let's figure it out together, right? Data is a team sport. Remember, it's not about the smartest person on the team. It's about the group getting smarter together. So framing it this way can shift that why from a sting to a high five. And we're all accountable to each other as a high-functioning team. So 8 years later, Ben's still asking me why. This is from about a month ago. He's holding me accountable, right? But because I've come to know that when he says, but why, it's actually a really good thing. Hey, Ben, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. And this allowed us to get to the answer a lot more quickly. It allowed it to go from a, hey, I want to look at some data, into what would have otherwise been a wild goose chase. We're both a lot happier and wiser in our old age. Yeah? Yeah? Okay, and so one other piece of this that I wanted to just share is, as a marketer, I came up through the product marketing world. And one of the things that I recommend to my teams and that I learned early on was to be involved in the product development process upstream of writing code, right? And that allowed it to be so when you ship a feature, you don't have to just slap some messaging on it afterwards. You're really delivering on something that customers really need. It makes messaging a lot easier. I think data is the same way. Making sure that as business people, your data folks are in the room as you're planning new initiatives can allow them to see around the corner and start writing the metrics that make sense in advance. They'll also start getting a handle on the messaging or the language that you use as a domain expert, how support teams talk about their support tickets and their interactions with customers, how salespeople talk about their sales process, right? That'll be some really wonderful nuance to help you get the ins and outs of the metrics you're trying to define. So if you're not in those rooms, ask to be in those rooms. I bet your business partners will say 100% will consider you part of our team. I know I say that to our data analysts all the time. Okay, so now let's get into your happy place, right? This is a very light screenshot, but you're defining the metric and running the job in dbt. The updated metrics are going to be reflected directly in mode with a quick refresh. So that means that you and your business stakeholder can work together, powered by software, to see if that metric makes sense as you're building it. If the dimensions you've set up are getting them the cuts that they need to answer the questions that are going to be follow-on. So this is especially helpful because it's unlikely that any of the people you're working with, except for some of those purple people, are going to have a dev environment set up. And that fast iteration on these metrics is really important once you've set all that context. And because we're all not sitting side by side in an office anymore, you can stay in your tool and your business teams can stay in a tool that's friendly and fast for them as well, and you can be seeing the same thing. So we built this integration to have smart capabilities around the things that are one of those other horror stories, the aggregates of aggregates, summing distinct values, et cetera. This frees you up to focus on the iteration and ensure that this number doesn't match mine isn't because of analytical missteps, but more because there's additional context that needs to get codified into your metrics. And as business people, we can go into it with a little bit more confidence that we're doing the right thing, we're not gonna mess something up. So let's be real. I know there's a lot of debate about how useful a dashboard is. It's really great for the day-to-day understanding of what data looks like. And once you've got those metrics defined, every dashboard that's built in mode, backed by a dbt metric, is going to have the dbt badge on it. So people say, when I'm looking at revenue, this is the revenue that we have all agreed on that reflects our collective intelligence, right? So one of the things business teams can really do as they're using tools like this, as they click into these dashboards and explore a trend that's going on and answer those next questions that they anticipated up front, we can share back with our business team or our data teams about what we learned, the decisions that we're making. It's a really wonderful opportunity to say thank you. And so when we're doing all of this upfront work, it might feel slow, but ultimately it's going to help us save a lot of time and help us iterate more quickly together, right? And this is hugely important to giving analysts time back to do that next level analysis that's really gonna drive your business forward, that more strategic work. So 3 key takeaways. Leverage the collective intelligence. So start with the friendly why and create the conditions in which that why can be answered in a really smart, open way. Slow down to go fast, so use a single-step prereq process. And then don't fear the iteration. Use the right tools for everyone. Make sure that it's cool that you're in your tool and you're serving up the exact same thing in mode. You might want to start thinking about sort of what are the right metrics for your business. This is a B2B SaaS company like Mode. You know, your L1 metrics, the things that you're probably reporting to your board, what are the steps below that you can start to ladder up to get there to these top-line metrics. So if you're interested in getting started, you can sign up for our beta at mode.com/getdbt, and we're really excited to see you in the product. Thanks.